I came home from the hospital on a Thursday evening expecting silence, maybe the hum of the refrigerator or the creak of settling wood. Instead, the house felt hollow in a way that made my skin prickle. I'd spent 5 days in that sterile building, hooked to monitors after my heart decided to throw its own little rebellion, and all I wanted was my bed, my routine, maybe some leftover casserole. But the moment I pushed open the front door, something shifted in my chest that had nothing to do with my recent cardiac episode. The living room stood empty, furniture untouched, but the air felt disturbed, like someone had just passed through. Then I heard it, laughter drifting down from upstairs, light and careless, followed by a man's voice I didn't recognize. My hands went cold. My husband wasn't supposed to be home until tomorrow. I set my overnight bag down slowly, trying to make sense of what I was hearing, but my mind kept circling back to one terrible possibility I didn't want to name. If you've ever felt that gut drop moment when your world shifts, drop your city in the comments, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I stood there in my own entryway, heart hammering against my ribs in a way the cardiologist would definitely not approve of, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe the television was on upstairs? Maybe my husband had come home early and invited a friend over. Maybe I was still medicated and hearing things that weren't there. But the laughter came again, and this time I caught my husband's voice, mixed in with it, unmistakable even through the floorboards. He wasn't supposed to know I was being discharged today. I'd told him Saturday, given him the wrong date on purpose because I wanted to surprise him, maybe have the house cleaned up and dinner started before he walked in. The surprise was mine now, and it sat in my stomach like a stone. I'd been married to Richard for 23 years, and in all that time, I'd never once questioned his faithfulness. We'd built a life together in this house, raised 2 kids who were now out building their own lives, weathered job losses and health scares and the regular erosions that time brings to any marriage. He'd visited me in the hospital every single day, brought me crossword puzzles, and kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. He'd held my hand when the doctor explained the blockage, promised we'd get through it together. And now I was standing in our hallway, listening to him laugh with someone upstairs, and every good memory felt like it was being rewritten in real time. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, announcing my presence whether I wanted them to or not. The laughter stopped abruptly. I heard movement above, quick footsteps, a door closing softly. My hand gripped the banister hard enough to make my knuckles ache. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk back out, pretend I'd never come home early. The other part, the part that had survived a heart attack and 5 days of hospital food, needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. I reached the top of the stairs and stood in the hallway, looking at our closed bedroom door. The silence now felt worse than the laughter had. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too fast. The cardiologist's warning echoed in my head. Avoid stress, take it easy, no sudden shocks to your system. Too late for that. I walked to the bedroom door and wrapped my fingers around the knob. It was cool under my palm. I pushed the door open. Richard was standing by the window, arms crossed, his expression somewhere between startled and guilty. But he wasn't alone. Sitting on the edge of our bed was a man I'd never seen before, younger than us by a decade at least, wearing jeans and a sweater, looking equally uncomfortable. For a moment, nobody spoke. My brain scrambled to make sense of the scene. My husband, a stranger, our bedroom, the guilty silence. Then Richard's face shifted, and he rushed toward me. "Margaret, what are you doing here? You said Saturday." His hands reached for me, but I stepped back instinctively. The man on the bed stood up slowly, clutching a manila folder to his chest. He glanced at Richard, then at me, clearly wishing he could disappear. Richard's eyes were wide, but not with the fear of being caught in an affair. It was something else. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice small and uncertain. "I didn't know you'd be home. Richard said we'd have time to go through everything before you got back." He held up the folder like it was an explanation, but it only confused me more. I looked at Richard, waiting for something that made sense. My husband's face had gone pale, and he was wringing his hands in that way he did when he was genuinely anxious. "Margaret, please sit down," he said. "You just got out of the hospital. You shouldn't be standing." He tried to guide me to the armchair in the corner, but I shook him off. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. What's going on? The stranger shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly regretting whatever had brought him here. Richard took a deep breath, and I saw his eyes fill with tears. This is Michael, Richard said, his voice breaking slightly. He's a private investigator. The words hit me like a physical blow. A private investigator. In our bedroom. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was Richard having me followed? Was he building a case for divorce? Had he hired someone to dig into my finances, my past? Something I didn't even know was a problem? Michael took a step forward, still holding that damned folder. Mrs. Carver, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your husband hired me 3 weeks ago, before your hospitalization. He was trying to keep this quiet until he had all the facts. Facts about what? I looked at Richard, whose tears were now streaming down his face. He looked terrified, but not of me. He looked terrified for me. I didn't want to tell you while you were sick, he whispered. I didn't want to stress your heart. The irony would have been funny if I wasn't so utterly lost. Richard moved to the bed and sat down, patting the space beside him. This time I took it, my legs finally giving up on supporting my weight. Michael remained standing, professional but clearly uncomfortable with the emotional scene unfolding. Tell me, I said, looking at my husband. Whatever it is, just tell me now. Richard reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His fingers were cold. It's about your mother's estate, he said quietly. I started noticing discrepancies in the paperwork your brother sent us last month, things that didn't add up, so I hired Michael to look into it. My mother had passed away 8 months ago, leaving behind a modest estate that was supposed to be split equally between me and my older brother David. He'd been handling everything, said he'd take care of the legal work since he lived closer to where Mom had spent her final years. What kind of discrepancies? I asked, though part of me already knew where this was going. David and I had never been particularly close. He was the golden child, the successful lawyer, the one who always knew better. I was the younger sister who'd gone into teaching, lived a simpler life, never quite measured up in my mother's eyes, even though she'd never say it outright. Michael cleared his throat. Mr. Carver asked me to examine the estate documents your brother provided, and then to cross-reference them with county records, the actual will on file, and your mother's financial statements from the last 2 years of her life. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. The will your brother sent you was not the will your mother filed with her attorney. It's not even close. He handed me a document, and I stared at it, the words swimming in front of my eyes. The will David had sent us 3 months ago stated that Mom's estate, valued at around $87,000 after the sale of her condo and liquidation of her accounts, was to be divided with 60% going to David and 40% to me. He'd explained it away easily. Mom had wanted to compensate him for the years he'd spent managing her medical appointments and finances. It had stung, but I'd accepted it. I'd always accepted coming in second. But the document Michael was showing me now, the real will, told a different story. Your mother's actual will divides everything 50-50, Michael said. She updated it just 14 months before her death, and the attorney who drafted it is still in practice. I spoke with him. He confirmed the document's authenticity and was quite surprised to hear that a different version had been distributed to the family. My hands started to shake, and not from my recent medical event. David forged a will? I said the words out loud, but they didn't feel real. My brother was a lawyer. He knew the consequences of something like this. He'd spent Christmas at our house 2 years ago, playing with our grandkids, laughing over turkey. Now Michael was telling me he'd fabricated legal documents to steal my inheritance. Richard squeezed my hand tighter. It gets worse, he said softly. Michael pulled out another sheet, this one a bank statement. Your brother was named executor, which gave him access to your mother's accounts before the estate was settled. According to these records, there were 3 large withdrawals in the 2 months after her death: $12,000, $15,000, and $18,000. The explanations listed were estate expenses, funeral costs, and legal fees. He pointed to specific entries. I verified actual funeral costs through the mortuary, $6,500. Legal fees to the probate attorney, $3,200. The rest of those withdrawals have no legitimate documentation. I felt like I was back in the hospital, monitors beeping, world tilting. David had stolen from our mother's estate. He'd forged a will. He'd lied to my face while I was grieving, while I was trusting him to handle things properly. "How much?" I asked, my voice hollow. Michael did the math quickly. "Based on the true will and the documented expenses versus what he claimed, your brother has misappropriated approximately $51,000 from the estate. You should have received $43,500. You received $28,000. The difference is $15,500, but that doesn't account for the funds he withdrew fraudulently that should have been split between you." My head was spinning. Richard's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a gesture he'd done 1,000 times before, usually when we were watching television or sitting in church. Now it was an anchor keeping me from floating away entirely. "I have copies of everything," Michael said, his professionalism a strange comfort in the chaos. "The original will, your brother's forged version, bank statements, withdrawal records, and a statement from your mother's attorney. I've also documented the timeline. Your brother sent you the fraudulent will on February 18th, exactly 2 weeks after the real will was filed with the probate court. He was counting on you not to check county records yourself." He set the folder on the bed between us. "This is enough to file criminal charges if you choose to. At minimum, it's enough to force a reopening of the estate and a full accounting." I looked at the folder like it was a bomb. In a way, it was. Opening this up meant destroying what was left of my relationship with my brother. It meant dragging our family through a legal nightmare. It meant admitting that the person I'd trusted had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But it also meant justice. It meant my mother's actual wishes would be honored. It meant David wouldn't get away with treating me like I was too stupid or too trusting to notice. Richard was watching my face carefully. "I didn't want to bring this to you in the hospital," he said again. "The doctor said any stress could trigger another event. So I asked Michael to come today because I thought we'd have until Saturday to figure out how to tell you." His voice cracked. "I was trying to protect you, but I also couldn't let your brother keep stealing from you, from us. That money could help with your medical bills, with our retirement. It's not just about the inheritance. It's about what's right." I nodded slowly, my mind starting to process through the shock. My husband had done this for me. While I was lying in a hospital bed, he'd been investigating, gathering evidence, building a case. "Does David know you're looking into this?" I asked. Michael shook his head. "Not unless someone has tipped him off, which I doubt. I've been careful. All my inquiries were legitimate. Public records, interviews with people who had no reason to contact him. As far as your brother knows, you accepted his version of events." That was true. I'd signed the papers he sent, deposited the check, never questioned anything. The guilt I'd felt over being a burden during Mom's final years had made me feel like I didn't deserve to ask for more. David had known exactly which buttons to push. Richard stood up and walked to the dresser, pulling something from the top drawer. It was a small leather notebook, the kind Mom used to keep in her purse. "I found this when we were cleaning out her apartment," Richard said, handing it to me. "Your brother never saw it because I picked it up while he was dealing with the building manager." I opened the notebook with shaking hands. It was Mom's handwriting, dated entries from the last year of her life. Some were mundane, grocery lists, appointment times, medication reminders. But scattered throughout were longer passages, almost like diary entries. I flipped to one dated March 15th, 2 years ago. "Lunch with David today. He asked again about updating the will, says I should leave him more since he's been helping so much. I told him everything stays equal between my children. They're both my kids. I don't care who makes more money or lives closer. Fair is fair." My throat tightened. I flipped forward, finding another entry from 6 months later. "David keeps pushing about the will, starting to wonder if his helping is more about positioning himself than about caring for his mother. Changed my will today to make it crystal clear. 50-50, no exceptions, and I told the lawyer to keep a copy where David can't get to it." The next entry that mentioned the will was dated just 3 months before she died. "Told David today that the will is final and he needs to stop asking." He seemed angry. "I hate that money is coming between my children before I'm even gone. But I won't be manipulated." I closed the notebook, unable to read more. My mother had known. She'd seen David's intentions and had protected against them. but she couldn't have predicted he'd go so far as to forge documents after her death. Richard sat back down beside me. I should have shown you this sooner, but I wanted to have all the evidence first. I wanted to make sure we had everything we needed before we confronted him. He gestured to Michael's folder. Now we do. I looked at the investigator, this stranger who'd been digging through my family's dirty laundry. What do you recommend? I asked. Michael considered for a moment. You have 3 options. 1. You file criminal charges. This is fraud, forgery, and theft. The district attorney would likely prosecute if you press charges. 2. You hire an attorney and reopen the estate through civil court. Force a full accounting, claw back the stolen funds, and distribute everything according to the real will. 3. You confront your brother privately and demand he return the money, threatening legal action if he refuses. He paused. My professional opinion? Option 2. It's less nuclear than criminal charges, but still ensures you get what you're owed. It also creates a legal record that protects you if he tries to retaliate or spread his own version of events. But ultimately, it's your family, your decision. I sat there, the notebook in one hand, Richard's hand in the other, a folder full of evidence sitting between us. My brother had stolen from me while I was grieving our mother. The anger came slowly at first, then all at once. Not the explosive kind that makes you throw things or yell, but the cold, clarifying kind that makes everything suddenly simple. David had made his choice. Now I had to make mine. I need to think, I said, standing up carefully. My legs held this time. Richard and Michael both watched me with concern, probably worried I was about to have another cardiac event right there in the bedroom. But weirdly, I felt clearer than I had in days. The fog of medication and hospital routines was lifting, replaced by sharp, focused purpose. Michael, thank you for your work. Send your final invoice to Richard. I looked at my husband. And thank you for doing this, for protecting me even when it meant keeping secrets. He looked relieved. Michael gathered his papers, put them back in the folder, and handed it to Richard. Call me if you have questions or need additional documentation. After Michael left, Richard and I sat in silence for a long time. The sun was setting outside our bedroom window, casting long shadows across the floor. Finally, he spoke. What are you going to do? I thought about my mother's notebook, her clear instructions that both her children should be treated equally. I thought about David's lies, the forged signatures, the money he'd stolen. I thought about the years I'd spent believing I was the lesser sibling, that I deserved less because I'd achieved less, earned less, been less present. I'm going to call an attorney tomorrow, I said. I'm going to reopen the estate and get back what Mom wanted me to have. Richard nodded, his hand finding mine again. I'll help you, whatever you need. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept playing through scenarios, imagining confrontations, preparing arguments. But mixed with the anger was something unexpected, relief. The next morning, Friday, I called Marcus Chin, an estate attorney whose daughter I'd taught senior English 5 years ago. He remembered me and agreed to see me that afternoon. Richard drove me to his office, the folder of evidence sitting in my lap like a ticking bomb. Marcus's office was in a renovated Victorian downtown, all dark wood and leather chairs. He listened to the entire story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. Mrs. Carver, this is one of the more clear-cut cases of estate fraud I've encountered. Your brother's forgery is almost comically obvious once you compare the documents. Different fonts, different legal language, even a different notary stamp. He was either very arrogant or very desperate. Marcus spread the papers across his desk. He probably assumed you'd never check, and honestly, most people don't. Can we get the money back? I asked. That was the only question that mattered now. Marcus nodded. Absolutely. We'll file a petition to reopen the estate, present evidence of fraud, and request a full forensic accounting. The probate court will freeze any remaining estate assets and require your brother to document every penny he spent. For the funds he can't account for, he'll be personally liable. He tapped the forged will. This document is going to bury him. Forgery of legal instruments is a serious crime, even when family is involved. The court won't look kindly on an attorney who falsified his own mother's will. He paused. I should warn you, this will get ugly. Your brother will likely hire his own attorney, claim it was a misunderstanding, maybe even try to paint you as the aggressor. Family lawsuits always get nasty. I'd expected that. How long will it take? If he cooperates, maybe 3 to 4 months. If he fights, could be a year or more. But the evidence is so strong that I can't imagine any judge ruling in his favor. Marcus started drafting documents right there, explaining each step. Petition to reopen the estate, motion for forensic accounting, request for emergency hearing given the evidence of fraud, subpoena for my brother's financial records. The legal machinery was massive, but Marcus moved through it with practiced ease. I'll file everything on Monday morning, he said. Your brother will be served by the end of next week. Once he receives the petition and sees we have the original will plus bank records, he'll know he's cornered. Marcus looked at me seriously. Are you prepared for him to contact you directly? He'll probably call, maybe show up at your house. People do desperate things when they're caught. I hadn't thought about that part. Richard and I drove home in silence, both processing what was now inevitable. The legal wheels were turning. By this time next week, David would know everything. I imagined his face when the server handed him the court documents, the panic as he realized his scheme had unraveled. Part of me felt sick about it. He was still my brother, despite everything. But a larger part felt the cold satisfaction of justice finally being served. That weekend, I tried to rest like the cardiologist had ordered, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Richard kept bringing me tea and crossword puzzles, attempting to maintain some normalcy. Sunday afternoon, my daughter called from Portland. Mom, how are you feeling? Dad said you came home Thursday. I told her I was fine, didn't mention the investigation or the legal filing coming Monday. She didn't need to be dragged into this yet. Have you talked to Uncle David recently? She asked casually. The question made my stomach drop. Not since the hospital. Why? She hesitated. He called me yesterday, asked if you'd said anything weird about Mom's estate, if you seemed confused or paranoid. It was strange. I told him you seemed normal, just tired. My hands clenched around the phone. David was fishing, trying to figure out if I suspected anything. Maybe someone had tipped him off after all, or maybe he was just paranoid. Either way, he was circling, probing. If he calls again, don't tell him anything about my health or what I'm doing, I said. Just say I'm recovering, and we're focused on that. My daughter agreed, confusion clear in her voice, but she didn't push. After we hung up, I told Richard about the call. His face went pale. He knows something's wrong, he said, or he's worried something is wrong. We need to be careful. Monday morning felt like waiting for a bomb to drop. Marcus texted me at 10:30. Documents filed. Your brother will be served Wednesday or Thursday. Now we wait. The rest of Monday and all of Tuesday crawled by. I tried to distract myself with household projects, but everything felt surreal. I was walking through my life knowing that a grenade was about to go off, and there was no way to know how the shrapnel would land. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. David. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Richard, who was sitting across from me doing a crossword puzzle, looked up sharply. Don't answer it, he said. Not yet. Not until you're ready. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, he called again. Then again. Then he texted. Meg, call me. It's urgent. Need to talk about Mom's estate. Emergency. I showed Richard the text. He's been served, he said quietly. He knows. I knew he was right. The panic in those texts was obvious. I turned my phone off and set it on the counter. I'm not ready to talk to him yet. He can stew in it. That night, David called the house landline, a number we barely used anymore. Richard answered, his voice cool and professional. David, Margaret isn't available right now. You can communicate through your attorney. I could hear his voice through the receiver, raised and frantic, but couldn't make out words. Richard listened for a moment, then said firmly, You need to contact the attorney we've listed in the court filing. This is a legal matter now, not a family phone call. He hung up. His hand was shaking. He's furious, he said. Keeps saying it's all a misunderstanding, that I've poisoned you against him, that he can explain everything if you'll just listen. Good, I said, surprised by the hardness in my own voice. Let him be furious. He earned it. Thursday morning, Marcus called with an update. The judge reviewed the petition and is fast-tracking this given the clear evidence of fraud. We have a hearing scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Your brother's attorney has already reached out to my office, asking if there's any way to settle this without a full hearing. That caught my attention. Settle how? Marcus sounded amused. They're offering to return $15,500, the difference between what you received and what you should have received under the forged will. They're pretending the forged will was legitimate, and this is just about the distribution percentage. They're not acknowledging the fraudulent withdrawals or the forgery itself. It was a desperate move, and we both knew it. That's not enough, I said. I want full restitution based on the real will. That's what I told them, Marcus replied. They'll come back with another offer, probably within a few days. They're trying to avoid the hearing because once we're in front of a judge with this evidence, your brother is facing serious consequences. He paused. How do you want to handle this? Are you willing to settle if the terms are right, or do you want your day in court? I thought about my mother's notebook, her clear wishes. I thought about David's years of manipulation, making me feel like I deserved less. If he returns every penny he stole, documents every fraudulent withdrawal, pays for all legal fees, and apologizes in writing, I'll consider settling. But he also has to agree that if I find any other hidden assets or lies, the settlement is void and we go straight to criminal charges. Marcus whistled. You're not messing around. Neither was he, I replied. Friday afternoon, David showed up at my house. I watched through the window as he parked his BMW in our driveway, sat there for a moment, then got out slowly. He looked terrible, unshaven, rumpled suit, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. For a second I felt a flash of sympathy. Then I remembered the forged will, and the feeling evaporated. Richard stood beside me. Do you want to talk to him? I shook my head. Not without Marcus present. He's just going to try to manipulate me, convince me this is all a big misunderstanding. But David was already walking toward the door. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times. Then he started knocking. Meg, I know you're in there. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain. His voice was muffled through the door but audible. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I made a mistake. I opened the door but left the screen door latched. We stared at each other through the mesh. Siblings who'd grown up sharing a bedroom, who'd fought over toys and later over who got the car on Friday nights. All of it felt like ancient history now. A different lifetime. A mistake? I said, my voice flat. Which part was the mistake, David? Forging Mom's will? Stealing $45,000? Lying to my face while I was grieving? He flinched. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Mom always favored you, you know that. The way she talked about your teaching, your family. I was just the son who made money. I thought I deserved more for everything I did for her those last years. His justification was stunning in its selfishness. So you committed fraud, I said. You forged legal documents. You stole from your own sister. David's face crumpled. I'll give it back, all of it. Just drop the court case, please. If this goes on my record, I lose my law license. I lose everything. There it was, the real concern. Not that he'd betrayed me, not that he'd dishonored our mother's wishes, but that he might face actual consequences. You should have thought about that before you decided to forge a will, I said. Every action has a price, David. You made your choices. He grabbed the screen door handle, shaking it slightly. Meg, I'm your brother. We're family. You can't do this to me. Richard appeared beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. She didn't do this to you, he said coldly. You did it to yourself. Now get off our property before we call the police. David looked between us, seeming to finally understand that this wasn't going to end with a tearful reconciliation and a handshake. You'll regret this, he said. But there was no real threat in it, just desperation. When the family finds out, when everyone knows you dragged your own brother to court, they'll turn on you. I almost laughed. The family is going to find out you forged our mother's will and stole from her estate. If they turn on anyone, David, it's going to be you. He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, hands clenched at my sides. Richard wrapped his arm around my waist. You did the right thing, he said softly. I know it doesn't feel good, but it's right. He was correct on both counts. That weekend, I finally told my daughter and son what was happening. Both phone calls were difficult. My daughter was shocked and angry, having always looked up to her uncle. My son, more pragmatic, immediately asked what he could do to help. "Just be there," I told him. "This is going to get messier before it's resolved." Monday morning, Marcus called with the news I'd been waiting for. "They've agreed to your terms. Full restitution of $51,000, detailed accounting of all estate transactions, payment of all legal fees, and a written apology acknowledging the fraud. They want to settle immediately to avoid the hearing." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "What about the criminal charges piece?" Marcus's voice was satisfied. "If any other fraudulent activity is discovered, you reserve the right to pursue both civil and criminal remedies." They agreed to that too. "Your brother is desperate to make this go away." I thought for a moment. Justice wasn't just about money. It was about acknowledgement, about making sure David understood the gravity of what he'd done. "I want the apology to be specific," I said. "I want him to state exactly what he did, that he forged the will, that he made fraudulent withdrawals, that he lied about estate expenses. No vague language, no mistakes were made, passive voice. He names his actions." Marcus made a note. "I'll draft it and send it to his attorney. If he signs it, we'll schedule a settlement conference and close this out." 3 days later, I sat in Marcus's conference room, David across the table with his attorney, a nervous-looking woman in her 40s who kept glancing at her client like she couldn't believe she'd taken this case. Marcus laid out the settlement agreement, page by page. David would wire transfer $51,000 to an escrow account within 5 business days. He would provide copies of all estate-related documents. He would pay Marcus's fees, which had reached $12,000, and he would sign the apology letter. Marcus slid the letter across the table. David picked it up with shaking hands and read it, his face going through shades of red and white. The letter was 3 paragraphs, each sentence a knife. "I, David Carver, admit that I created a fraudulent version of our mother Eleanor Carver's last will and testament. I forged her signature and falsified the document to increase my share of her estate at the expense of my sister Margaret. I made unauthorized withdrawals from her accounts totaling $45,000, which I claimed were legitimate estate expenses, but were not. I lied to my sister about these actions and attempted to deceive her regarding our mother's true wishes. I understand that my actions were both illegal and morally wrong. I apologize for the pain and betrayal I have caused." David set the letter down. "If I sign this, it stays between us, right?" Marcus answered before I could. "The settlement agreement includes a confidentiality clause. Neither party will discuss the terms publicly without mutual consent. But the apology stays on file with the estate records, which are public documents. Anyone who looks up the estate case will be able to see it." David's attorney leaned in and whispered something to him. He closed his eyes, then picked up the pen on the table. His hand hovered over the paper for a long moment. Then he signed, his signature a scrawl that looked nothing like the confident strokes I remembered from birthday cards when we were kids. Marcus witnessed it, then passed copies to everyone. "The wire transfer has to be completed by Friday," he reminded David's attorney. "If it's not, we proceed to the hearing and Mrs. Margaret Carver reserves the right to file criminal charges." David stood up abruptly, not looking at me, and left the conference room. His attorney gathered her papers quickly. "The money will be transferred by Wednesday," she said, then hurried after her client. After they left, Marcus turned to me. "How do you feel?" I didn't know how to answer that. Victorious, sad, hollow, all of those and none of them seemed right. "I feel like I did what I had to do," I finally said. "Like I honored Mom's wishes." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what you did. And for what it's worth, I've seen a lot of these family estate cases. Most people can't bring themselves to follow through. They let the wrongdoing slide to keep the peace. You didn't. That takes real courage." I didn't feel courageous. I felt tired. But I also felt lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been lifted. Richard was waiting in the reception area. I didn't have to say anything. He saw it in my face. Wednesday afternoon, Marcus called to confirm the wire transfer had cleared. $51,000 minus his fees and expenses, leaving me with $39,000 beyond what I'd already received. It wasn't a fortune, but it was justice. It was my mother's voice saying that both her children mattered equally, even when one of them had tried to silence her. That evening, Richard and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. He held the leather notebook, my mother's handwriting visible on the pages. "She'd be proud of you," Richard said quietly, "for standing up for what was right, even when it was hard." I took the notebook from him, running my fingers over the worn cover. Inside were grocery lists and appointment reminders, but also the record of my mother's intentions, her clarity about what she wanted. The notebook had become the unexpected key to everything. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. I continued my cardiac rehab, Richard went back to his woodworking hobby, and we talked about how to use the recovered money. Some of it would go toward my medical bills, some into retirement savings. We also decided to put $10,000 into a trust for our grandchildren's education. It felt like a way to honor Mom's legacy, to keep her belief in fairness alive for another generation. My daughter eventually called, having processed everything. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see what Uncle David was doing. I always thought you two were fine." I assured her it wasn't her job to police family relationships. My son sent a card that simply said, "Proud of you, Mom." It sat on my desk for weeks, a reminder that doing the right thing mattered, even when it cost something. David never contacted me again. Through family gossip, I heard he'd moved to a different state, claimed it was for a job opportunity, but everyone suspected he was running from the shame. His attorney had advised him to relocate before word spread through the legal community about what he'd done. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, just a dull ache for what our relationship might have been if he'd chosen differently. Mom's notebook stayed in my desk drawer, a reminder that truth has a way of surviving even when people try to bury it. Sometimes I'd open it and read her entries, feeling connected to her in a way I hadn't when she was alive. She'd known David's nature, had seen through his manipulation, and had tried to protect us both from his greed. Her final act of love was that updated will, crystal clear in its intentions, impossible to misinterpret. It had taken a private investigator and a legal battle to honor it, but it was done. 3 months after the settlement, I got a letter from David's ex-wife, Karen, whom he'd divorced 2 years earlier. She'd heard about the estate case through their kids and wanted me to know something. "David did the same thing to me during our divorce," she wrote. "He hid assets, forged documents, lied about income. I didn't have the energy or money to fight him properly, so I accepted less than I deserved. When I heard you'd taken him to court and won, I felt vindicated somehow. Thank you for not letting him get away with it." I showed the letter to Richard, and he just shook his head. "Patterns," he said. "People who'll cheat family will cheat anyone." It made me wonder how many other people David had deceived over the years, how many had chosen silence over confrontation. I felt grateful that Richard had refused to be one of them. The physical recovery from my heart attack took months, but the emotional recovery from my brother's betrayal took longer. I found myself questioning memories, wondering which moments had been genuine, and which had been manipulation. Had David ever actually cared about me, or had I always been just an obstacle to whatever he wanted? Richard reminded me not to let his actions poison everything. "You had a brother once," he said. "That person might have been real, even if he changed into someone you don't recognize. Hold on to the good memories, but don't let them excuse what he became." It was wise advice, though hard to follow. I tried to remember the David who taught me to ride a bike, who defended me from bullies in middle school. That person felt like a ghost now, haunting the shell of whoever my brother had become. By late fall, the estate was officially closed. The probate court issued a final order distributing assets according to Mom's real will, with detailed notes about the fraud that had been uncovered and corrected. It became part of the public record, a permanent stain on David's reputation. His name would forever be associated with forging his own mother's will. I didn't take pleasure in that, but I didn't regret it either. Actions have consequences, and David had chosen his path. Marcus sent me the final paperwork with a note. "Justice isn't always satisfying, but it's always necessary. You did right by your mother." I filed everything in a folder labeled simply "Estate Resolved" and put it in the filing cabinet. Closing the drawer felt symbolic, like sealing away a chapter of my life I'd never wanted to experience. Thanksgiving that year was strange. Traditionally, David and I would alternate hosting, bringing our families together for turkey and football and the comfortable chaos of cousins playing in the yard. This year, there was no invitation from his side, no expectation of reconciliation. We hosted a smaller gathering, Just Richard, our kids, and their families, and Richard's brother, who'd always been more family to me than my own brother had proven to be. During grace, my son-in-law, who knew the full story, added a line about being thankful for truth and justice. Everyone murmured agreement, and I felt a swell of gratitude for the family I'd chosen and who'd chosen me. Blood might be thicker than water, but loyalty and integrity mattered more. David had taught me that lesson the hard way, but at least I'd learned it thoroughly. Christmas brought an unexpected envelope in the mail, postmarked from Arizona. Inside was a card with a generic snowy scene and a note in David's handwriting. Meg, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it, but I want you to know I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. My therapist says I have issues with self-worth tied to achievement and money, that I was trying to prove something to Mom even after she died. None of that excuses anything. I stole from you. I lied to you. I betrayed Mom's trust. You were right to take me to court. I'm working on being a better person, though I know it's too late for us. I hope you're healthy and happy. That's all I wanted to say. I read the card 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, but it seemed genuine in its brokenness. Richard read it over my shoulder. What are you going to do? He asked. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to leave the door open for some distant possibility of reconciliation. But a larger part knew that some betrayals cut too deep, that some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Nothing, I said finally. I hope he does become a better person. I hope therapy helps him. But that doesn't mean I have to be part of his journey. I put the card in the estate folder, another piece of documentation in a story I was ready to move past. Richard kissed the top of my head. That's fair, he said. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can wish him well from a distance. New Year's Eve, Richard and I stayed home, just the two of us, watching the ball drop on television with champagne and leftover Christmas cookies. At midnight, he raised his glass. To truth seekers and fighters, he said. To husbands who hire private investigators and wives who don't give up. I clinked my glass against his. To partners who have your back even when it's hard. We sipped in comfortable silence, the old year sliding into the new one. The house was quiet around us. No laughter from upstairs, no strangers in the bedroom, just the peaceful rhythm of a life built on trust and honesty. That moment when I'd come home from the hospital and heard voices had changed everything, had revealed both betrayal and loyalty, had tested what I was willing to fight for. I'd passed that test, even if it had cost me a brother. January brought a new year and new routines. My cardiologist declared me recovered enough to return to part-time work. I'd retired from full-time teaching 3 years earlier, but still did substitute work occasionally. Walking back into a classroom felt like reclaiming part of myself, reminding me that my worth wasn't tied to inheritance or family drama, but to the lives I'd touched and the work I'd done. The kids in my senior English class were reading King Lear, and the themes of betrayal and family dysfunction hit differently now. When we discussed Goneril and Regan's treachery against their father, I found myself explaining the emotional reality behind Shakespeare's plot with a depth I hadn't possessed before. The students noticed. One girl stayed after class to say my teaching felt more real this semester, more connected to actual life. I took that as a compliment, though it had come at a high price. February marked 1 year since David had sent the forged will. I realized it only because Richard mentioned it one evening, checking something on the calendar. Has it really been a year? He asked. Since all of this started? It felt longer and shorter at the same time, the way traumatic events distort time's normal flow. We'd lived months of stress compressed into weeks of action, then months of aftermath stretched out like taffy. But we'd survived it. More than that, we'd won. Not just legally, but morally. We'd proven that integrity still mattered, that wrongs could still be righted if you were willing to endure the battle. That night, I took Mom's notebook out one last time and read through it completely, front to back. Then I wrote my own entry on a blank page near the end. Mom, I made sure your wishes were honored. It wasn't easy, but it was right. I hope you'd be proud. March brought warm winds and early flowers, the world waking up from winter. Richard's woodworking class hosted a student show, and he displayed a series of boxes he'd made during the months of the legal battle. Each one was slightly different in design and finish, representing his emotional journey through the crisis. The artist's statement he wrote talked about finding stability in craft when everything else felt chaotic, about creating order from disorder. I stood in the gallery, looking at his work, amazed as always by his ability to turn pain into beauty. A man next to me, a stranger, commented on how powerful the collection was. "You can feel the struggle in these pieces," he said, "but also the resolution." Richard had captured exactly what we'd been through, had given form to the formless anxiety and anger and eventual peace. I bought his entire collection, all 9 boxes, so they'd stay together. April found me in the garden, planting tomatoes and peppers in the raised beds Richard had built years ago. My hands in the dirt, sun on my back, I felt the last residues of anger finally draining away. David's betrayal would always be part of my story, but it didn't define me. What defined me was how I'd responded, with Richard's help, with legal rigor, with determination to see justice done. I'd honored my mother's wishes. I'd protected my own dignity. I'd refused to be a victim. The tomato plants were small and fragile now, but by summer they'd be heavy with fruit. That's how recovery worked too. Slow growth, careful tending, patience. You couldn't rush it. You couldn't force it. You just had to show up every day and do the work, trusting that time and effort would eventually yield something good. In May, my granddaughter's 6th birthday party filled our backyard with chaos and joy. Kids ran through the sprinkler, cake was demolished, presents were opened with the beautiful lack of grace only children possess. At one point, my daughter pulled me aside. "Mom, I'm really glad you fought for what was right with Uncle David. I know it was hard, but it taught me something important about not letting people take advantage of you, even family, especially family." She hugged me tight. "You're a strong woman, and I'm lucky you're my mother." Her words meant more than the money ever could. That was the real inheritance Mom had left. Not the cash or the condo proceeds, but the example of living with integrity, of standing up for what was right even when it cost you something dear. I'd pass that lesson to my kids, and they'd pass it to theirs. June marked 6 months since the settlement. The money had been distributed, bills paid, savings replenished. But more important than the financial resolution was the emotional one. I no longer felt like the lesser sibling, the one who deserved less because she'd achieved less in the world's eyes. I understood now that Mom had never seen me that way. David's manipulation had poisoned my perception, made me doubt my own worth. The legal battle had been about money, yes, but more fundamentally, it had been about refusing to accept a false narrative about my value. In reclaiming the inheritance, I'd reclaimed something more important, my sense of self. Richard had seen that from the beginning, had understood that hiring Michael wasn't just about the money, but about truth itself. He'd given me an incredible gift, even if it had come wrapped in painful revelation. Summer settled in with its familiar rhythms: morning coffee on the porch, afternoon naps, evening walks around the neighborhood. My heart had healed. My routines had stabilized. My family was thriving. The empty space where David used to be still ached sometimes, but mostly I felt relief. Relief that I didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to ignore my instincts or talk myself out of suspicions. The relationship had been broken long before I'd discovered the forged will. I'd just been too loyal or too naive to see it. Now I could grieve what was truly lost. Not the brother I had, but the brother I'd imagined I had. Those are different losses, and the second one is somehow easier to bear because it's rooted in reality rather than fantasy. Richard said grief is just love with nowhere to go. I was learning to redirect that love toward people who deserved it. By August, I'd stopped checking my phone anxiously, stopped wondering if David would call or show up. The hypervigilance that had characterized the months of legal battle faded into simple watchfulness, then into normalcy. Life has a way of absorbing even seismic events, of smoothing them into the landscape until they're just part of the terrain you navigate. The estate case became something that had happened, past tense, rather than something that was happening. I could tell the story now without my heart racing, could discuss it with friends without anger twisting my voice. That emotional distance was its own kind of healing, proof that time does its work if you let it. I wasn't grateful for David's betrayal, but I was grateful for what I'd learned about myself, that I could fight when necessary, that I had people who'd stand with me, that justice was worth pursuing even when it was painful. September brought cooler nights and the return of routine. School started, and I picked up more substitute teaching shifts, enjoying the energy of teenagers navigating their own dramas and discoveries. One day, teaching a unit on ethics, I posed a hypothetical. If you discovered a family member had stolen from you, would you pursue legal action or let it go to preserve the relationship? The debate that followed was passionate and divided. Some students argued family loyalty trumped everything. Others insisted wrongdoing had to have consequences regardless of relationship. I didn't share my own story, but I listened to their arguments with new appreciation for how complex these questions really were. There were no easy answers, just the messy reality of human relationships colliding with principles of justice. The students left class still arguing, which I considered a success. October arrived with falling leaves and the anniversary of my return from the hospital. 1 year ago, I'd walked into my house expecting peace and found instead the beginning of a revelation that would change everything. Standing in that same entryway now, I tried to remember exactly what I'd felt in that moment. Confusion, fear, that spike of adrenaline that came from hearing unexpected voices. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was about to unfold, would I? Would I warn her about the pain ahead, the family rupture, the legal battle? Or would I just tell her to trust Richard, trust the process, trust that she'd be strong enough to handle it? Probably the latter. Some lessons can only be learned by living through them, by making the choice to stand up even when sitting down would be easier. Richard found me standing there, lost in thought. "You okay?" he asked, wrapping his arm around my waist. I nodded, just thinking about everything that's happened this year, how different things are now. He leaned his head on my shoulder. Better or worse? I considered the question honestly. I'd lost a brother, but I'd gained clarity. I'd been through stress that could have killed me, but I'd survived and was stronger for it. I'd discovered betrayal, but also loyalty. Different, I finally said. Not better or worse, just different. More honest, maybe. Richard kissed my cheek. I'll take honest over comfortable any day. That summed it up perfectly. The old relationship with David had been comfortable because it was built on my willingness to accept less, to not ask hard questions, to maintain peace at any cost. The new reality was uncomfortable, but true. As fall deepened into winter, I found myself thinking about legacy. Mom had left behind more than money and property. She'd left a clear statement of her values: fairness, equality, honesty. By fighting to honor her real will, I'd protected that legacy, ensured her voice continued to matter even after she was gone. That felt important in a way I couldn't fully articulate. We all want to believe our lives mean something, that our choices echo beyond our own existence. Mom's choice to update her will, to make her intentions crystal clear, had created those echoes. Her insistence on equal treatment had become my insistence on justice. Her refusal to be manipulated had become my refusal to be cheated. In honoring her wishes, I'd honored something larger. The principle that truth matters, that integrity isn't negotiable, that some things are worth fighting for even when the cost is high. December came around again. Another Christmas without David, another holiday season navigating questions from extended family about why we'd grown apart. I'd developed a simple response. We had a fundamental disagreement about our mother's estate, and it couldn't be resolved. I wish him well, but we're not in contact. Most people accepted that without prying deeper. Those who knew the full story understood without needing explanation. My cousin Janet, who'd always been perceptive, pulled me aside at a family gathering and said simply, "I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm not surprised." David always had a way of bending rules to suit himself. Her acknowledgement felt validating, confirmation that I hadn't imagined the patterns, that others had seen them too. It made me feel less alone in the whole mess, less like I'd caused the rupture by refusing to stay silent. The new year arrived with its usual mix of hope and resolution. Richard and I made a pact. No more secrets, even well-intentioned ones. He'd kept the investigation from me to protect my health, and I understood why. But we agreed that moving forward we'd face everything together, good or bad. Trust isn't just about believing your partner won't betray you. It's about believing they'll tell you the truth even when it's hard, even when they want to protect you. We'd learned that lesson the painful way, but we'd learned it thoroughly. On a quiet January evening, sitting by the fireplace, I pulled out the settlement documents one last time. All the papers, all the evidence, all the proof of David's wrongdoing. Then I took them to the fireplace and fed them to the flames, keeping only the final court order and Mom's original will. The rest was documentation of pain I no longer needed to carry. As the papers burned, Richard watched silently. When the last page curled into ash, he asked, "How does that feel?" I thought about it. "Like letting go," I said. "Not forgiving, not forgetting, just letting go of the weight of it." There's a difference between remembering and dwelling, between learning from experience and being trapped by it. I'd carry the lessons forward, the importance of standing up for yourself, the value of partners who have your back, the reality that family relationships require honesty to survive. But I didn't need to carry the documentation anymore, didn't need physical proof of David's betrayal. I knew what had happened. The court knew. The public record knew. That was enough. The flames crackled and popped, consuming the evidence, leaving only heat and light and ash. It felt like the right kind of ending. Not triumphant, not bitter, just finished. Complete. Done.